Full story. The final act of reclaiming my place in the family. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's full story, we dive deep into the emotional journey of Emily, a woman who spent her life seeking love and approval from her family, only to face betrayal and rejection. Watch as she uncovers painful truths and ultimately finds peace within herself. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Silent Wars for more heartfelt stories. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Emily. Last week, something happened that completely shattered my world. I sat across from my parents, expecting the usual small talk, when they said something I never imagined I'd hear. They looked me straight in the eye, and with a coldness that I still can't shake, they told me they regretted having me. Not because of anything I'd done, no. It wasn't my behavior or my choices. They regretted having me because I wasn't their perfect child. For 28 years, I fought tooth and nail to matter to them, to be seen, to be loved. I bent myself into shapes I thought they wanted, changing who I was, sacrificing pieces of myself, just to get a glimpse of their approval. But deep down, no matter what I did, I never felt like I was enough. I wasn't the golden child, the one who met their expectations. I wasn't the one they bragged about at family gatherings or celebrated on every milestone. And in the eyes of my parents, that was a flaw I couldn't overcome. I had always tried to be the good daughter. I was the one who quietly stepped into the background during family events, never demanding attention, just hoping they'd notice me, hoping for a kind word, a simple acknowledgement. I gave them my savings when they needed it, always putting their needs above my own. Yet, despite everything, I remained a shadow in their lives, just an afterthought. The love I longed for seemed so distant, so out of reach. I can still hear the way they said it, the nonchalance in their voices, as if it was just another fact, another statement of reality. "We regret it," they said, as though my existence was nothing more than a mistake. It cut through me, deeper than any criticism or harsh word could. For the first time, I realized that no matter how much I tried, I could never be what they wanted me to be. And in that moment, I finally understood the truth had always been right in front of me. I wasn't just their child. I was a ghost in their eyes, never truly part of the family. Growing up, I always tried to be the perfect daughter. I did everything I could to make my parents proud, hoping for just a sliver of their affection. It wasn't about grand gestures or seeking validation, it was the small things. I gave them all my savings when they were in need, never hesitating to offer what I had, even when it meant sacrificing my own comfort. I was the one who quietly observed, standing in the background during family events, hoping for a glance, a word, anything that might show me I mattered. But as time passed, I began to realize that no matter how much I gave, how much I did, it was never enough. I wasn't the golden child. I wasn't the one they bragged about to relatives, or the one whose accomplishments were celebrated with pride. I was always just there, a shadow in the corners of their lives, never quite seen or heard. It was a cold rejection that I couldn't wrap my head around. I didn't understand why they treated me this way, especially when I had tried so hard to be everything they wanted. It wasn't about anything I had done. There was no mistake, no failing on my part. It wasn't as if I had made poor choices or let them down in any way. I just wasn't what they had hoped for. I wasn't the child they envisioned, and somehow, that was enough for them to push me aside, piece by piece, until I was nothing more than an afterthought in their lives. The hardest part was knowing that it wasn't my actions that caused this. I hadn't done anything to deserve their rejection, yet it still came. There was no explanation, no moment where I could pinpoint what had gone wrong. It wasn't even about me as a person, it was simply because I wasn't perfect in their eyes. I wasn't the child they could show off to their friends. I wasn't the one who could meet their expectations of success and perfection, and so I was erased. Quietly, subtly, but unmistakably. It didn't matter that I loved them. It didn't matter that I gave everything I had to them. I wasn't their golden child, and that alone was enough to make me invisible. It was a rejection that stung more than any words ever could, leaving me questioning not only my place in their lives, but my worth as a daughter. It was never meant to be seen. My journal, the one thing that I held onto for so many years, was my sanctuary. A place where I could finally speak my truth without fear of judgment or rejection. I had poured my soul into its pages, each entry a reflection of my heartache, my dreams, and my longing for a love that I could never seem to earn. The pages were filled with raw emotions, frustration, anger, sadness, and even moments of clarity that I couldn't express to anyone else. It was the only way I knew how to cope with the silent rejection that haunted me every day. I never intended for anyone to read it. It was my private space, my safe haven. The words I wrote were my truth, unfiltered and untainted by the expectations that others had of me. It was the one place where I could be completely honest, even if the truth was painful. In those pages, I wrote about the loneliness I felt, the constant battle to be seen, the desperation to matter to my family. I wrote about the emotional scars they had unknowingly given me, the hurt that had built up over the years, and how I longed for the approval that never came. But one day, my parents found it. The one thing I thought was safe, hidden from the world, was now in their hands. They read the words I had written, and for the first time, they really saw me. They saw the pain, the hurt, the truth that I had been too afraid to share with them. And for a brief moment, I thought they might finally understand. Maybe, just maybe, they would see the depths of my struggle and realize how much I had longed for their love and acceptance. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. They couldn't undo the years of hurt that had built up between us. They couldn't take back the words they had said in the past, the ones that had wounded me so deeply. The years of emotional neglect, the cold dismissal, and the constant comparison to the child they wished I could be. They couldn't erase those memories, nor could they undo the truth I had laid bare in my journal. It was a moment that changed everything, but it also marked the point of no return. The rift between us had already been set in stone, and while they may have broken down in that instant, the damage to our relationship was irreversible. What had been unsaid for so long had now been spoken, and we would never be the same again. I parked my car down the street from my childhood home, the familiar sight of the old house taking me back to a time when things were simpler, before the distance grew between us. The house still stood there, the same as it had always been, its faded blue shutters, and the creaky porch swing that my dad used to sit on during warm summer nights. Everything about it was unchanged, and yet, everything felt different. It was as if I were standing in a place that no longer belonged to me. I had a small basket in my hands, filled with freshly baked scones blueberry, Dad's favorite. I could almost hear his voice in my head, telling me how much he loved these. I thought that maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. Maybe this time they would see me, really see me. Maybe the years of silence, the years of hurt, would fade away in the warmth of a simple gesture. Maybe the scones, a small offering of care, could bridge the gap between us. I had hoped that they would look beyond the past, beyond all the unspoken words, and see the daughter standing before them, yearning for their love and acceptance. But as soon as I walked through the front door, something didn't feel right. The house looked the same, but the energy in the air was different, distant, cold. The familiar smell of home wasn't there, replaced by something empty, something that made me feel like an outsider in the very place that once held so many memories. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach as I walked into the kitchen, where Mom was busy preparing lunch, and Dad was reading the newspaper, his face buried in the pages. They didn't even look up when I entered. I set the basket of scones on the kitchen counter, waiting for a word, any acknowledgement that I was there. But there was nothing. No smiles, no hugs, not even a glance. The silence between us was louder than any argument, and the distance I had felt for so long now seemed unbearable. I had hoped that this visit, with its small act of love, would somehow change things. But as I stood there, waiting for a spark of recognition, it became painfully clear. I was still invisible to them. Nothing had changed. They didn't see me, at least. Not the way I had hoped. The truth hit me harder than I expected. No matter what I did, no matter how much I tried, I would always be a stranger in my own home. I stood in the kitchen, feeling the weight of the silence around me. My mother barely glanced in my direction, her focus completely on Celine, my perfect sister, who was going on and on about her latest career move. I could see the pride in my mom's eyes as she listened, hanging on to every word Celine said, as though nothing else mattered in the room. It wasn't that Celine had said anything extraordinary, she was just speaking about her job, but to them, it was as if her every word was worth gold. Meanwhile, I stood there with nothing but the faint sound of the scones I had just placed on the counter, the soft thud of the basket hitting the surface almost too loud in the quiet. Dad, as usual, was absorbed in his tablet, his eyes never leaving the screen. He nodded absent-mindedly when he did speak, as though he was only half there. I tried to catch his gaze, hoping for just a moment of connection, but he didn't even acknowledge my presence. It wasn't that he was unaware of me, no. He just didn't seem to care. The disconnection was so palpable that it stung, but I had grown used to it. The years of being unseen had prepared me for this moment, yet somehow it still felt like a punch to the gut. I placed the basket of scones down with a faint clatter, hoping it would make a sound loud enough to grab their attention. I stood there, waiting for a moment, a word, a simple gesture that would say, "I see you." But it never came. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating with the unspoken words we'd all avoided for so long. I was right there, standing in front of them, holding out the one piece of me that I hoped would matter, the scones, a small gesture of love and care. But it felt like I might as well have been invisible. As I waited, the reality settled in. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being erased. It was as though, in their eyes, I had never existed at all. The silence between us wasn't just an absence of sound, it was an absence of recognition, of validation, of love. And for the first time, I realized that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a momentary lapse, it was the way it had always been. In their world, I didn't matter. It was as if I didn't even exist. The truth hurt more than I could ever have imagined. I wasn't just forgotten, I was nothing. I tried again. My heart was pounding in my chest as I gathered the courage to speak, my voice trembling slightly. "I had my gallery opening last Friday," I said, my words coming out quietly at first, as if testing the waters. Over 200 people came, and the Tribune wrote about it. I hoped this would be the moment they would finally take notice. Maybe, just maybe, the recognition I had worked so hard for would break through their indifference. It wasn't much, I told myself, just a small piece of my world to share, a sliver of my life that I hoped would matter to them. But it didn't. Celine barely acknowledged me, continuing to speak over me as if I wasn't there. Her attention remained fixed on whatever new success she was boasting about, as though my words held no weight in the conversation. Dad, barely lifting his eyes from his tablet, muttered without interest, "Yeah, that's nice." His voice distant and detached, as if he were just going through the motions of responding. His words hung in the air, cold and dismissive, and for a moment, I wanted to scream. But then, Mom spoke, and her words cut deeper than any silence could. "Emily, you've always been a bit too dramatic," she said with a flick of her hand, as if waving away my accomplishments. "You don't need a crowd to feel good about yourself." Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as though she were offering advice to a child who simply didn't understand. But those words, sharp and dismissive, sliced through me like a knife. They weren't just a critique of what I had said, they were a rejection of who I was. Once again, it wasn't about what I had done or achieved. It was about me, who I was, and how I would never be enough in their eyes. I had poured my heart into that gallery opening. It wasn't just an event, it was a testament to years of hard work, of battling self-doubt, and fighting for my place in a world that had always told me I didn't matter. But in that moment, with my mother's words ringing in my ears, I realized it didn't matter how many people showed up, how many accolades I received, or how much recognition I got. To them, I would always be that dramatic, invisible daughter. To them, I would never be enough. I stood there, my chest heavy, feeling more alone than ever in that room full of people I had called family. I don't think I'll ever forget the moment my father said it. His words were so calm, so cold, that for a moment, I thought I must have misheard him. "We shouldn't have had a third child," he said, his voice so calculated it felt as if he were making a business decision, analyzing a set of facts with no emotion attached. There was no anger, no frustration, just the flat, unfeeling delivery of a truth he had clearly carried with him for years. And then, as if the sting of those words wasn't enough, he added, "We weren't ready for you." It felt like a punch to the gut. My breath caught in my chest, and for a second I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in the suffocating weight of those words. A lifetime of love, sacrifice, and longing suddenly seemed so insignificant, so pointless. My parents, the two people I had tried so desperately to please, had just told me, with such detached finality, that my very existence had been a mistake. Before I could respond, Mom chimed in, trying to soften the blow with her usual quick correction. "We regret it," she said, her voice trembling slightly as if she could feel the weight of the words she was saying. But then, as if realizing how harsh her statement sounded, she quickly added, "That doesn't mean we don't love you." But the damage was already done. The words had already pierced through everything I had believed about myself and my place in this family. Love, to them, was conditional. It was a love that depended on meeting expectations, on being the right version of the person they wanted me to be. I wasn't their golden child, their perfect daughter, and that was all that mattered. Nothing else could ever fill that gap. I didn't know what to say. I stood there, frozen, feeling like I was watching a version of myself that no longer belonged in this space. The truth of their expectations, the coldness of their rejection, weighed heavier than anything I had ever experienced. In that moment, I realized that I would never be enough for them, not because of what I had done or failed to do, but because who I was would never fit into the mold they had set for me. I wanted to speak, to shout, to demand an explanation, but nothing came out. I couldn't find the words. Instead, I just stood there, paralyzed by the realization that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had made it clear that I was never what they wanted. As I walked down the hallway of my childhood home, the familiar scent of butter and cinnamon filled the air. It was the smell I remembered from countless mornings, the scent of warmth and comfort that always made me feel like I belonged. But something wasn't right. The house, though unchanged in so many ways, felt alien to me now. The quiet creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, the soft hum of the house as it always had been, seemed distant, as if I were intruding on a space that had long ago moved on without me. I approached the photo wall, the one that had always been a centerpiece of our home. It was a place where memories were displayed, our milestones, our celebrations, our family's history framed in photographs. I could almost hear the voices of my parents reminiscing about the past, telling stories about each photo, each moment frozen in time. But as I got closer, I felt a chill run through me. The wall had changed. There were new frames now, new memories hanging where mine once had been. I saw pictures of Celine's wedding, her smiling face framed in a moment of triumph. There were photos of her growing family, the laughter of her children captured in time. And then there were photos of our brother, pictures of him with his wife, their family, moments of celebration and togetherness. But not a single one of me. I stood frozen, my heart sinking with every second that passed. The photo from my graduation, the one that had once been the pride of the house, was gone. In its place, a blank spot stared back at me, as though it had never existed. The space on the wall where I had once proudly stood, my face full of hope and achievement, was now empty, erased. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the absence was suffocating, and for a moment, I felt like I was choking on the silence that had settled in around me. It was as if I had never been a part of this family, as though my memories, my accomplishments, didn't matter. They had been wiped away, replaced by new stories, new lives that seemed to matter more than mine. The more I looked at that empty space on the wall, the more the realization set in. I wasn't just absent in the photos, I was absent in their lives. Everything I had worked for, everything I had hoped to achieve for their approval, seemed so insignificant now. I wasn't even worth remembering. I couldn't stand there anymore. My knees buckled under the weight of it all, and I felt as if the ground beneath me was giving way. I wanted to scream, to shout out every word that had been building up inside me for years, but nothing came. The words I had longed to say, the anger, the pain, the frustration, all of it seemed to be trapped in my throat, as though even my voice had been erased along with my place in this family. I didn't want to stay any longer. I didn't want to face the cold, indifferent expressions on their faces, the way they continued to ignore me, as if I was just a shadow passing through their lives. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the house, the scones I had so carefully baked still sitting untouched on the counter. The basket felt like a weight in my hands, but I didn't turn back. The air outside was cooler than I expected, a sharp contrast to the stifling silence I had just left behind. It seemed to mirror the emptiness I felt inside, the coldness that had settled deep in my bones. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from the chill, but from the overwhelming sense of loneliness that had suddenly gripped me. For so long I had hoped that something would change, that one day they would see me, really see me, and finally recognize the person I had always been. But today, I knew the truth. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that I had never been the person they wanted me to be. As I walked back to my apartment, the weight of everything that had happened settled heavily in my chest. With every step, the reality became clearer. I wasn't just unloved. I was never what they expected me to be. And for them, that was unforgivable. The thought hit me like a wave, drowning out everything else. They don't regret having me. They regret that I didn't turn into the person they wanted. The words kept repeating in my mind, echoing in the silence of the walk home. It wasn't that they didn't love me, it was that I had failed to be the perfect daughter they had imagined. I wasn't the golden child, the success story, the person they could brag about. And now all that was left was their regret, and my own, for having spent so many years trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. When I finally reached my apartment, I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Sadness? Maybe both. But one thing was clear. I was done. It was time to stop fighting for a place where I was never meant to belong. Back in my apartment, I stood in the doorway, holding the scarf my mom had given me 5 years ago. I had kept it all these years, even though I had never really needed it. The scarf itself wasn't special, it was just a simple, soft woolen thing, the kind of gift you give without much thought. But for some reason, I held on to it, like a tether to something I couldn't quite let go of. Maybe it was the idea of her, the mother I had always wanted, the one I hoped would one day truly see me. I never asked for much, never demanded attention, never expected anything extraordinary from them. All I ever wanted was to be enough. I just wanted to be loved for who I was, without having to shrink myself into something I wasn't. But in that moment, as I stood there holding the scarf, the weight of everything I had tried to ignore hit me all at once. I realized I had spent my entire life trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. I had bent and twisted myself into shapes I thought they wanted, all while silently telling myself that one day I would be enough. But I was wrong. I thought back to that one memory when I was 9, the memory I had tried so hard to forget. I had been eavesdropping on a conversation between my parents, something I had never meant to hear. I could still recall the words clearly. We never wanted her. She was an accident. The words cut through me like a knife, and in that moment, something inside me shattered. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't the child they had planned for. I had been an inconvenience, a mistake, someone who had never fit into the neat little picture they had for their lives. That memory had haunted me for years, but I had always buried it deep inside. I had tried to move past it, telling myself that things would get better, that one day they would see me for who I was. But standing there, in my apartment, holding onto that scarf, I finally understood the truth I had been hiding from myself all this time. They had never wanted me. They had never accepted me for who I was. I had spent my life trying to fill a space that was never mine to occupy. The realization was brutal, but it was also freeing. I had spent so long trying to be something I wasn't, but now I knew. I had nothing to prove to them anymore. It was time to stop shrinking and start living. 2 days had passed, and the silence between us felt unbearable. The weight of everything that had happened was still heavy in the air, hanging between me and my family like an unspoken truth. I thought about what had been said, about the words that had shattered me, and yet, I couldn't shake the need to understand how they would act next. And then, the message came. Sunday brunch. Be there. Mom. I stared at my phone, my fingers frozen on the screen. The words stung, like a slap to the face. There was no warmth in the message, no invitation to reconnect, no hint of care. It was a command, plain and simple, and I could feel the sharpness of it cutting through me. It wasn't the kind of message you send to someone you love, it was the kind of message you send to someone you want to control, to force into a situation without any regard for their feelings. I stood there for a moment, staring at the message, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay away, to let the silence continue and never face them again. But another part of me, a part that I couldn't ignore, knew that I needed to go. I needed to know. I needed to see if they would continue pretending like nothing ever happened, if they would still act as if they hadn't just crushed me with their words, with their rejection. Nora, the one person who always understood me, had already anticipated what was coming. She knew what this was. She knew the game they played, and when I called her, her voice was filled with concern. "Don't go," she said, her tone soft but firm. "You know what they're planning. They'll act like it's all okay, like nothing's changed, but it's all just a facade." I wanted to listen to her, to take her advice, to stay away and protect myself from the hurt. But the truth was, I couldn't stay away. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know if they would keep pretending, if they would continue to bury the truth in their comfortable silence. I needed to know if, for once, they would confront what they had done, or if they would just carry on as if everything was fine. So, despite everything, I decided to go. It wasn't about forgiveness. Not yet. It was about understanding what would happen next, about finally confronting the lies we had all been living. And as I put on my coat and grabbed my keys, I knew this brunch would be more than just a meal. It would be the breaking of silence, the moment when everything would either change or shatter completely. When I arrived at the brunch, I was immediately directed to a small table in the corner. The position was so far removed from the family that it felt like I was invisible before I even sat down. I could see them, my parents, my sister, and her family, gathered at the main table, laughing and chatting as if nothing had ever happened. I was a side note, a distant afterthought, nothing more than a shadow in a room full of people who had once called me their own. It wasn't that they were being overtly rude, it was the subtlety of their indifference that cut deeper than anything else. My parents didn't even acknowledge my presence when they raised their glasses to toast Celine's promotion. The clinking of their glasses echoed in my ears, a celebration of her success, but I was nothing more than an unspoken detail in their lives. The silence around me felt suffocating. I tried to push aside the sinking feeling that threatened to swallow me, but it was impossible. I had come here hoping for some kind of recognition, for a word, a glance, something that would tell me I mattered. But there was nothing. Celine, always quick with a comment, leaned over and whispered in my ear, her words cutting through the silence. "You know they only invited you to avoid a scene, right?" she said, her voice dripping with the kind of cold truth that only family can offer. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a fact she knew all too well. And in that moment, the truth hit me harder than anything my parents had ever said to my face. I wasn't there because they wanted me there. I wasn't invited out of love or because they missed me. I was there because they wanted to avoid the discomfort of having me not show up. It wasn't about me at all. I was just a prop, a formality, to keep up appearances. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. Maybe it was because I had expected this. I had been invisible for so long, it seemed almost fitting that I would be left to sit alone in the corner, unnoticed, as they celebrated without me. The truth was too clear to deny. This wasn't a family reunion. This wasn't a moment of healing or reconciliation. It was just another reminder that I didn't belong. And maybe, for the first time, I realized that perhaps they should have just left me invisible. It would have been less painful than this hollow charade. After the brunch, I drove back home, but this time, something in me had shifted. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not with the anger I had anticipated, but with something deeper. It was a cold, unsettling feeling that settled in my chest, a mix of betrayal, loss, and finality. I had hoped for anything that would give me a reason to believe this family still cared, still saw me as part of their world. But instead, I had been left to sit in a corner, ignored, forgotten. The reality of it all was finally settling in, and I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep pretending that things would ever be different. It was time. I drove straight to the law firm. The drive felt endless, the minutes dragging on as I wondered what I would find. When I arrived, I walked through the glass doors and into the sterile, cold office that had always felt foreign to me. I was handed the legal papers that I had never expected to see. I took them in my hands, my heart sinking as I glanced at the pages. It was there in black and white the trust had been altered and I had been written out. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words on the paper seemed unreal, a cruel twist of fate. They hadn't even told me, not a single word. All these years I had fought for a place in their lives, for some recognition, for the love and acceptance that never came, and now it was all official. I had been erased, not just emotionally, but legally as well. My share of the family estate, the inheritance that should have been mine, had been taken away, like I never existed in the first place. I called my dad, though I knew it wouldn't change anything. His voice was as cold as ever, detached and distant. "You've been distant," he said, as though that was an explanation for everything. "It's complicated." That was it. No apology, no regret. Just a brief, dismissive explanation that meant nothing. It wasn't complicated. It was simple. They had made their choice, and I had been cast aside. I felt the finality of it all, the weight of their rejection pressing down on me. They had written me out of their lives, and now, in every sense, I was truly gone. The realization hit me harder than I could have imagined. The truth was clear. I had never been part of their world. I never truly mattered. The truth hit me like a freight train. I had known something was wrong for a long time, but I had never allowed myself to fully accept it. Now, standing there with the legal papers in my hand, the weight of the betrayal was undeniable. I wasn't just being excluded from the family, I had been written out completely, erased from the very legacy I had worked my whole life to be a part of. And it wasn't just about money. As much as that sting cut deeply, it was the betrayal, the cold, calculated way they had gone about it. They had done it while I was recovering in the hospital. While I was vulnerable, recovering from the physical and emotional toll of life, they made sure to make their move. It was the perfect time. No one expected anything from me. No one knew what I was going through. That's when they quietly took everything I had contributed over the years and claimed it as their own. All the sacrifices I had made for them, the times I had given everything I had to help them, had been erased. All my efforts, all my time, all my love gone. I had always been there for them, always putting them first, always bending myself to their will, even when it broke me. I had sacrificed my own dreams, my own happiness, just to make sure they were okay. Yet, in their eyes, I had never been enough. I was never the person they wanted me to be, and that alone was enough for them to shut me out, to take everything I had given them and claim it as their own. What stung the most was that they had never once considered me worthy enough to be a part of the family legacy. I had worked for years, trying to prove my place, hoping that one day I would be seen as more than just an afterthought. But it had never been about me. It had never been about the love I had to give or the contributions I made. I was nothing more than a tool they used when it suited them, and once they had gotten everything they needed from me, they discarded me like I was worthless. The betrayal ran deeper than anything I had ever imagined. It wasn't about money or property. It was about respect, about love, about being seen for who I truly was. And in that moment, I realized that I had never truly been seen. Not by them, and maybe not even by myself. The family legacy, the inheritance, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the truth I had been taken for granted my whole life, and now I was left with nothing. I drove to their house one last time, though this time there was no sense of hesitation, no longing for approval. I had made up my mind. My hands gripped the legal documents tightly, the weight of them heavier than I had ever imagined. Each sheet felt like a stone, a reminder of the life I had given up to be part of their world, and how it had all been taken from me without a second thought. As I stood in front of their house, the familiar place that once held so many memories, I couldn't help but feel like an outsider. This was no longer home. I walked inside, past the familiar walls that used to feel like my sanctuary, but now they felt cold and distant. I went straight to the kitchen where they were gathered, as if nothing had changed. The same routine, the same emptiness. They didn't even look up as I laid the papers down on the table in front of them. The sound of the documents hitting the surface seemed so final, like the last chapter of a book I had never wanted to read. "You erased me," I said softly, my voice steady, though every word felt like it was being dragged from the depths of my soul. The truth had been bubbling beneath the surface for so long, but now it was out in the open, and there was no turning back. "But I'm putting myself back in." I could see the shock on their faces, but it was fleeting. The truth never seemed to truly settle with them. Celine, ever the one to deflect, let out a laugh, dismissing my words as if they meant nothing. As if I meant nothing, but I didn't care anymore. It wasn't about their reaction. It wasn't about their validation. I had reached the point where I no longer needed their approval to know my own worth. I had spent my whole life trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for me, trying to earn a place at their table. But now I realized I didn't need their table. I didn't need them at all. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving the truth behind on that table, where it belonged. The silence that followed felt deafening, but it wasn't the same suffocating silence I had known all these years. This silence was different. It was the silence of freedom. As I stepped into the cool air outside, for the first time in my life, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and I was finally free from the chains of expectation and rejection that had held me captive for so long. For the first time, I wasn't trying to be enough for them. I was enough for myself. Days passed, but the weight of everything still lingered. I found myself standing in front of a crowd, but this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't standing in a corner, invisible and unnoticed. I was standing at a podium, speaking to a room full of strangers, pouring my heart out. The words flowed freely, unburdened by the years of silence I had lived through. I talked about everything: the pain, the rejection, the betrayal. But more than that, I spoke about the journey of finally coming to terms with who I was. I had spent so many years shrinking, trying to make myself small enough to fit into a space where I never truly belonged. But now, standing there, I was reclaiming my voice, my presence, my life. And for the first time, I wasn't seeking anyone's approval. As I spoke, I could feel a sense of liberation, as though each word I said was another piece of the weight lifting off my chest. I wasn't speaking to impress or to justify myself anymore. I was speaking because I needed to, because my truth had been buried for too long, and now it was finally finding its place in the world. And then, in the midst of the crowd, I saw her, Celine. She appeared at the back of the room, standing there with her usual confident air, her eyes scanning the room as if she owned it. I saw her approach, and for a moment I felt the old pang of anxiety, the familiar urge to shrink back into the shadows. But this time, something was different. She tried to catch my eye, to speak, to explain away everything that had happened, to minimize the truth I had just shared. But I wasn't listening. I didn't need her to explain anything. I had heard all the explanations I ever needed in the silence of my own life, in the years of rejection, in the moments when I was made to feel invisible, like I didn't matter. Celine's words were hollow to me now. She wasn't the one who had the power to define me anymore. For so many years, I had lived in her shadow, trying to compete, to earn the love and approval I thought I needed. But not anymore. I wasn't invisible now. I wasn't shrinking to fit into anyone's idea of who I should be. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to be enough for anyone. I just was. I was standing tall, speaking my truth. And for the first time, I realized something that changed everything. I mattered. I had always mattered. And no one, not even Celine or my parents, could take that away from me. The story highlights the deep emotional journey of seeking love and acceptance while realizing that true worth comes from within. It teaches us that regardless of the validation or rejection we receive from others, our value is not defined by external approval. Life often pushes us to fit into roles or expectations that may not align with who we truly are, and this can lead to feelings of invisibility or inadequacy. However, the story shows that at some point, we must recognize that our own self-worth is not dependent on others' acceptance or acknowledgement. For many of us, especially as we age, it's important to remember that we have lived rich lives, filled with experiences and lessons that have shaped us into who we are. In this stage of life, we can find peace in knowing that we are enough just as we are. It is never too late to reclaim our voice, to let go of the weight of trying to please others, and to focus on our own growth and happiness. The lesson is simple yet powerful. You matter. You have always mattered. And your worth is inherent in who you are, not in what others expect from you. Thank you so much for watching. We hope this full story touched your heart. If you enjoyed it, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to Silent Wars for more emotional and inspiring content. Your support means the world to us.